All right, welcome back. Third point that I want to make this week is talk about posse comitatus. This is a very important concept that has pretty much impacted how you've lived your entire life. You just didn't know it. In the United States, since 1878, it has been illegal to use federal troops, which is U.S. Army, in the role of law enforcement. Okay, you can't do it. It's against federal law, and actually, between a combination of federal law and DoD decree, no federal service can be used as law enforcement. And that includes the U.S. Army, U.S. Navy and Marines, and then the U.S. Air Force. None of those can be used to enforce laws or provide security, provide law enforcement powers, arrest, detainment, anything like that, inside the borders of the United States. And this is done to prevent things which you have read about in the papers your entire life. It's done to prevent federal crackdowns on rights. It's done to prevent abuses against citizens, a variety of things. And it did come about in direct response to Reconstruction, post-American Civil War in the 1870s. And it's important. It's important to how our civil liberties are protected, but it's also important to us from a Homeland Security emergency management perspective as to how we can use these resources in certain ways. There are several exceptions to posse comitatus. Number one, the United States Coast Guard is by definition a federal law enforcement agency. They can act as federal law enforcement officers, and they do on a regular basis. Two, National Guard. You're all familiar with what the concept of a National Guardsman is, I hope. Part-time soldier, if you will. The vast majority of the time, the National Guard, when they're off doing their weekend drills or summer training or working in armories in local communities, they work for and belong to, if you will, the governor of the state in which they reside. So right here in Tallahassee, we have several National Guard units. They are right now today, when it's not wartime and they're not deployed, they work for the governor of the state of Florida. In that capacity, they can be used post-disaster. They can be used in a Homeland Security role. They could legally be used as law enforcement, though that is very rarely done. If a National Guard troop is federalized, is now working for the President of the United States, is being paid for by the federal side, this is typically done when they deploy lately to Iraq or Afghanistan, then they become federal troops and they fall under the same restrictions of posse comitatus that regular U.S. Army troops do. So there's some distinctions there. Okay. The other thing, we have what's called the Insurrection Act. When the President declares the Insurrection Act to be in place, which is only in case of rioting, wartime, insurrection. In those situations, then federal troops can be used as law enforcement. And again, these laws date back to the 1800s, but they're still used, they still guide our operations even today in emergency management and in law enforcement. Actually, the last time, if anybody knows, the last time the Insurrection Act was activated and federal troops were used as law enforcement was actually in 1992 in the LA riots, when LAPD, Los Angeles sheriffs, and the California National Guard were unable to keep the peace. Federal troops came in and assisted them in that. So it has happened recently. It may happen again. It has not happened in the post 9/11 era, and we'll hopefully that'll continue.